Item 14 is a action item. Chris, it's the investment policy management plan. If we manage our time well, we'll all be happier.
You guys have a
Profound
clicker up there?
words.
That didn't
You turn the
sound very
page?
enthusiastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was
Oh,
very.
Alan's got
We'll
it.
all be, yeah,
You said it like it's a bad thing.
that's my mind, Tom.
I'm gonna-
Okay,
We
Chris.
need new batteries. There we go. Da-da-da-da. Okay, very simple change to the overall policy. I told you when we adopted the new long-term asset allocation in 2015 that we would be back periodically. If you remember, we adopted step changes, not date changes, and that's because the markets are dynamic. So, in a nutshell, what you see on the screen, we're recommending increasing the target for risk mitigating strategies to 6% by June 30. So these are the numbers that would go in print in your annual reports and your statements to the outside world. That 3% increase comes 1% from global equity, as I mentioned, June. That's where the risk mitigating mostly comes from. We are recommending dropping the private assets one each. The long-term target remains unchanged, but it's a recognition that we need to move these periodically so that they're where it's at. It actually makes it a better measuring stick for you to figure out how the fund is doing, because those are such sticky assets. And staff recommends, and PCA had concurred. So unless, Alan, do you have anything to add?
No, this is completely consistent with everything that's been done in the past.
Very good.
Oh, and I'll add, just to already put it on your plan of flag, the next likely revision would be December 31. So I would be back at your November meeting with another likely change.
Okay, thank you. Paul, Mr. Rosenstiel.
Yeah, so first of all, great work on RMS. As I think Chris said earlier today, the quicker we can get RMS in place, the better, given some uncertainty into the future. So I'm glad that's moving well. I do have a question about the change in the potential steps, in particular on private equity, because an additional step was added, and the earlier the earlier policy actually had specific dates for it. Now what we have is a potential next step 3 and a potential next step 4 without any dates to them, and we've got an actual drop in the percentage going into to private equity. And I understand the denominator effect, but I also understand the numerator effect, that if private equity had kept up with the rest of the portfolio, then we wouldn't have that problem. So it's both things. But I was just wondering, because I know that we keep saying that long term we think that private equity is going to get back up to our 12.5% or whatever it is expected return, and we're going to get to 13%. But it seems like every time we revisit this, it seems to be further and further off. So I was just wondering if we could get some insight into the pacing and why we keep seeing it kind of slow down, given how important private equity is.
Before you jump in, Margaret, let me give you 2 points for the new board members. I know I'm trying to avoid sports analogies. All right, I got a car analogy. But imagine we're in the desert instead of on a street. We're on one spot on the Google map, and when you adopt a new asset allocation, you want to get to the other. And then rather than plot a course that takes us to our old target and then to that, we plot a new course. And what's happening to us, Paul, is as we're moving along, every time we rechange it, we replot the course from where we are today. And that's why we added these steps. We didn't have a date for the step 3 and 4 or 1 and 2 at that point, because we've learned back from our lesson in 03 and 05 that we can't rebalance based on a calendar. We have to rebalance based on the opportunity set in the market. I'm actually very optimistic, and so when we revisit this at December 31, we will then again plot from where we are at that point the long-term absolutely stays anchored. We're not changing that. You change that only in asset allocation studies. And I would say I'm optimistic we will get there in private equity for two reasons, and I might be stealing Margot's thunder, but one, we're talking about adding a new asset category or sub-asset category of core private equity. And we think that's going to be very interesting and may be in the next future a real good investment opportunity. And then based on the research I saw from Cambridge at a private equity conference put on by ILPA, they're pretty compelling that they think the rate of capital drawn versus distributions, even for mature plans like us, will shift in the near-term future. So we're almost right now break even, where we're finally, we have a lot of dry powder. Do you know what the dry powder?
That's what I was going to say.
Okay, go ahead.
12 billion. We've been laying the groundwork. In
So we've
closed
committed
session,
$12 billion that we owe people if they draw on it.
And they haven't.
we discussed a commitment pacing plan in closed session, and we're well on that plan. And the groundwork's been laid. The absolute NAV, fair market value of the private equity program has bottomed up and is going up. And so that is going to be changing. I mean, it's already in place. You couldn't stop it now. Private equity is going to be going up.
And I'm
Based on our commitments.
I sure hope you're right. I really do. I mean, I guess the question that I have is then we read, like in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, about tens of billions or trillions of dollars that the Saudi private sovereign wealth fund is going to have, and how much of that's going to be devoted. So I mean, I still think we keep hearing about so much money going into private equity. When we had the offsite in October, we had three people, we had a session on private equity, but what we did is we heard from three people in private equity, all of whom said, yes, it's going to be a challenge, but we're smart, so we're going to find the investments. And it's sort of like Lake Wobegon, not everybody's going to be, above average. So if we make any other, I hope we're not making other shifts, but if we are making other shifts, I'd really like to have a little bit more of a discussion about what's going on in the private equity world if we're asked to make one more
Again,
change.
here in open session, just keeping it general, I think we considered these factors going in, and how aggressive or unaggressive would we be in trying to get up to the 13%, and we came up with the plan, and I mean, we're on that plan, and we will revisit that plan every year to make adjustments. But we're neither going to fall short of that plan or exceed that plan in terms of, what we thought was the prudent course.
But we are changing the plan, is what I'm saying. You're asking us right now to change the plan.
We're changing a benchmark.
No, not this. That's the next item.
Okay,
This item, we are being asked to
Change
change
the
the
interim.
allocation.
okay.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is if we're asked to change the allocation once more, I'd like a little bit more discussion about private equity at that point. Thank you. Yeah.
Alan and then Stephen.
Yeah. I think looking at the last few years and looking at the lower allocation, it's really important to put it in context of how many distributions have occurred in the LBO market in your portfolio. You've had a massive amount of gains and a massive amount of capital coming back and not nearly as much being drawn down. That's because the market presented the opportunity for all of those liquidity events. I don't think anyone's forecasting that sort of event. And in fact, they're forecasting the opposite, that they're going to start drawing down. So I think Margot has given you a fair representation of what the market is. The challenge is, will the markets be more competitive, and will you get the expected rates of return that you hope for? That's more problematic, and I think that's well worth a separate conversation.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
I just wanted to highlight that in the short term in private equity, the amount you commit is somewhat disconnected from the amount that's invested on your behalf by private equity managers. And the reduction by 1% of the interim target to private equity in no way impacts staff's pacing of new commitments into the asset class. So I wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. Anyone else on the item? If not, I'd entertain a motion. This is a recommendation for action. Okay, it's been moved and properly seconded to approve the, it was moved by Ms. Ortega, seconded by Ms. Vargas. Any other discussion, questions, comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Item 15. So we have Ms. Worth, the head of private equity, and Seth Hall, deputy, second in line there, and our folks from Makita. I'll turn it over to staff and to our consultants on item 15. It's a revision and a second reading.
Thank you, Harry.
You're welcome.
Yes, Margot Worth, Director of Private Equity. So this is an action item. We introduced this item at the last meeting, and we're asking for a policy change here. To put this in one sentence, what we want to do is modify one of the two benchmarks we use in private equity such that it better measures the decision staff is making with respect to the portfolio rather than factors that are beyond staff's control. As I mentioned, there's two benchmarks. I've been here since 2001. The whole time I've been here, we've always had two benchmarks. There's always been a public market plus a spread benchmark. In other words, a premium. We want to earn more than public markets. We're the highest risk, highest return part of the portfolio, and we expect to earn more than the next highest, which is the public markets. So that's tended to be a long-term consideration, and it answers the question, should we be in this asset class? Are we being properly rewarded? The other benchmark we've always had is a peer benchmark, and the way a peer benchmark works is that a lot of data from LPs in the industry is aggregated, and then pooled medians are calculated, and then you can calculate and see if you're doing better or worse than the industry as a whole. So we've had a couple peer benchmarks since I've been here. We had something called Venture Economics, and that benchmark service kind of dissolved, and we switched to State Street in 2008. And in 2014, we made it explicit that the peer benchmark, the State Street peer benchmark, is the right benchmark to use for the 1, 3, and 5-year horizons. And that's the benchmark you see in the semi-annual reports from Makita. So when we went into that, the benchmark was relatively new. It's much more widely accepted now. And it's also much more common to customize. And so when we talk about customize, we're recommending two things. One is vintage year customization. And the concept here is that each partner that contributes data to this has a different situation. Some are mature programs, some are relatively new programs, some are endowments, some are foundations, some are public pensions. And so each is going to tend to, and each is going to have different asset allocations. And so each is going to tend to invest at a different pace. And so what the benchmark service provider does now, and we've been told for most of their clients, is that they adjust the benchmark so that it reflects each client's commitment pattern if that's what they choose to do. So in other words, if in a certain year, when we invest in a partnership, those stay in the portfolio for a long time. So, what we have for 2010 or 2013, if we have more or less proportionally than the benchmark, they change it and make it normal. So the arguments for doing this is that, one size doesn't fit all. We don't think most experts would say you really don't want to try to time your investments in private equity. You want to do a dollar cost averaging, if you will, type of concept where it's relatively flat. And certainly, Makita, since they've come on board, has been very supportive of that concept, and I think has suggested to staff that we haven't had enough discipline in doing that in the past, and I think staff agrees, and that has been the marching orders for staff over particularly the last year. In the last year, unlike past years, the board was fully briefed on the pacing decisions, and we have board buy-in. So going forward, that's the new model we see, where we would present an annual pacing budget, and the board would be advised on that, and that pacing would be relatively constant over time. So given that, we're not trying to time the market, we think the customization is appropriate, and again, will tend to make us compare apples to apples. I think I've already mentioned that of the State Street clients who use their benchmarking services, most do use customization. So the second level of customization we're recommending, which is again very common, would have to do with sub-asset allocation. And let me just put a disclaimer here. We have traditionally had 4 sub-assets. They're not the 4 sub-assets up there. We traditionally still have. We have buyout, equity expansion, venture capital, debt related. Well, both of the major benchmark providers now, State Street and Cambridge, those are the 2 main ones in the industry, do not have what we call equity expansion. They call what's in our equity expansion either some of the funds are buyout, some are venture capital. So we're recommending going forward that regardless of what we do for customization, that we standardize our designations to what's typical in the industry. And so what we're showing up here and what we'll show throughout the rest of the presentation is that adjustment. So we've gone from 4 to 3, but then we've added one here, and that's special mandates. And so the special mandates are the clean tech program we had in the mid-2000s. You still have significant investment value in there, and the proactive. And so those are primarily done through fund to funds, unlike the rest of the program, and have different characteristics. So what we've done in this chart is pull the special mandates out and then looked at the portfolio. And what this chart shows is that percentage of buyouts were what the benchmark has, and what we have is pretty close, but venture capital, we have significantly less than the benchmark. This is what you would expect because being a large program and being a public pension, it would not be practical for us to try to be 20% venture capital. I don't think anybody would think that's practical or wise. That is more the domain of endowments and foundations. We have certain disadvantages there, as do all public pension plans in our disclosure requirements, which prevent us from being in those. So what we're recommending is that the benchmark also be adjusted to reflect our sub-asset distribution. Yep. One additional thing we're suggesting here is, we've been talking to Makita about this, is a product called Core Private Equity. These are a new product. They're basically buyout, but these are partnerships that are going to hold the buyout investments for a longer period of time. We think this will have lower risk and a slightly lower expected rate of return. We think it's a really smart thing to do now to do this, because we'll have some first mover advantage, and we don't have a different benchmark for that, but we think that should be broken out, but still have the core, the buyout benchmark. So I'm going to pause for questions.
Before we go to questions, just the recommendation is on INV 116, and it's supported by Makita to align the benchmarks more closely with what staff has control over is the overarching theme. It's been a mismatch, but and this last item that you're talking about, I don't know if you're going to go further in depth with it, but my inclination is that's probably something we should discuss at a future meeting. Is there any action we're taking on this?
The item
This,
would create a different bucket for it, but it would be given the buyout benchmark. If
Okay.
we didn't get this, we'd put the investment in the buyout
okay,
bucket
so
anyway.
we'll proceed then.
It just creates a sub-asset category.
Okay.
And here I just, what we're recommending at the staff level is that the board, and I'll give credit to Dana, when we first adopted the State Street Index 2.5 years ago, she said, hey, wait a minute, we usually study indexes longer. You were right. And as we have now learned, and everyone's learned, that's kind of the State Street Index, it has to be customized. So we recommend that you use this as the investment committee measuring stick for the 1, 3, and 5 year periods going back, so that you're correcting it, and use this as your customized benchmark for the short-term measuring stick on private equity.
Okay. Let me get some people in the queue here, and I'm also mindful of the time, and I also know that at some point I don't function at such a low level that I normally function at, just a really low level. So maybe I'm the only one up here, but maybe I'm not alone. Mr. Rosensteel, then we'll go to Lynn, Ms. Paquin, and
Thank you.
see if we can move this along.
So the concept of having a benchmark that is not what the whole universe of private equity investors are invested in, given that it's more appropriate for venture capital for some investors, or the differences in vintage years makes sense. But what does not make sense to me, and this is what I'm kind of struggling with, is it seems to me we should still hold the performance by CalSTRS to a benchmark of what the reasonable universe is that we might have invested in, not what we ended up investing in. In other words, that our benchmark should not be 70% buyout and 15% debt related because we ended up investing 70% and 15% in those. It should be that our universe was that we could have invested that of the universe that we could have invested in, 70% was buyout and 15% was debt related, because ultimately then we want the staff to make the decision not only about selecting managers, which this seems to be really solely focused on, but selecting strategies, and as well as selecting to some degree pacing. Now I mean I think we do have a pacing plan. If that's a pacing plan that is approved by the board, then I think that's reasonable then to say that the benchmark should reflect that pacing plan if staff sticks to that pacing plan. But then the benchmark has to be the pacing plan, not what was actually invested if there's a deviation from the pacing plan. And so I would like to see this changed, not to go back to what we've been doing before, but to go to a customized benchmark that is the universe of what staff could make a decision to do, given the policies and direction of this board, not what staff ultimately makes a decision to do, because then I think that protects, then we don't measure whether those decisions were wisely made.
I can respond to that, and then I'll turn it over to Makita. This benchmark does measure that because the policy, because of our sheer size, the policy has targets for buyout, venture, debt-related, but there are ranges around there, which the staff gets to make decisions and weight things. So there are times where we have really overloaded debt-related because we felt it was a better investment vehicle. Your policy would be, your benchmark would be fixed weighted based on the long-term targets, which are in your book.
So it would be the targets.
So it would actually measure what you're asking.
It would be the targets,
Right.
not the actual investments made.
You can't, we would never recommend measuring the entire investment universe because we're too big and we could never buy
No, but as long
ventures,
as
so
it's
you know that.
as long as it's the strategic
Yeah.
targets and the pacing plan,
Yes.
then I'm okay with it. But I didn't read it that way, and
Okay.
and it would maybe be helpful to
That-
just clarify
We're
that?
saying the same thing, just
Okay.
different wording.
Okay.
But yes.
Okay, good. And I'd love it if, somebody could go back and just take a look at the wording, because I might too, because I didn't read it that way, but I'm glad that we're on the same page.
Yeah, the pacing plan is something we've always talked about. We've talked to the board about it, not in terms of a budget, but that's now become kind of common practice. Texas teachers just started that recently of coming to the board and saying, we're going to allocate a target of $5 billion this year. We've always used it, and I've actually talked to the committee at different times about the budget. We're telling staff you can't invest this much. And it is all driven by the asset allocation. That's the only way, that's what drives the budget, the commitment budget to private equity.
Stephen, do you guys want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just want to highlight one thing and not to diminish the importance of a nuanced discussion that we're having on the short-term benchmark. But from our perspective, what's more critical for the committee is the long-term benchmark, which is public equities plus a premium. To measure private equity over a period shorter than 10 years is always going to be a very, very, very imprecise exercise. You really don't know what the return is until it's matured for longer than that. So from our perspective, thinking about asset allocation, thinking about the efficacy of the asset class, and thinking about the opportunity set that you have if you weren't invested in the asset class, a long-term benchmark that's a public equity benchmark plus a premium makes a heck of a lot of sense. I think the only interesting question then is 3% the right premium number.
But see, I appreciate that, Stephen, because my question is how do we work with two different benchmarks? I mean, one is not defined. The short one is not defined in this policy as the benchmark for compensation purposes, and maybe it should be defined in that way, because isn't that really the only right use of that short-term benchmark? On the other hand, I don't know how we can make decisions about asset allocation when all we have is information that comes to us every 10 years. So that's the part I really struggle with here. And what I really struggle with is that I think the short-term benchmark isn't going to give us the same answer over the 10-year period that the long-term benchmark is measured. And then we're in a funny kind of situation, especially if we use the short-term benchmark to pay compensation because we thought we did a good job, and then we find out after 10 years that we didn't. So that's the thing that's really holding me up here is I think the reference to the 10-year, to the long-term benchmark as a 10-year measurement is almost kind of like there's one sentence in here. It's kind of a throwaway. It doesn't really say how we're going to use that. And so I'm personally not, at this point, in a position to support this until I can understand how those two are going to be better integrated and complement each other and not be seemingly in conflict with each other.
Yeah, so if I can respond, the long-term benchmark is certainly a better way to think about the asset class from an asset allocation perspective. Unfortunately, if your purpose over shorter periods is to measure the efficacy of staff's implementation of the program, that long-term benchmark is not effective, because public markets and private markets can exhibit very different types of behavior over the short-term period. So while the short-term benchmark is used for performance compensation, and that's sort of one purpose for it, I think it's also used for kind of the general reporting purpose, along with the long-term benchmark, to give you a more holistic perspective on the performance of the asset class and the performance of staff in executing the policies.
But not for the standpoint of saying, is this asset class
That's
performing
right.
the way we wanted it to? Because we do have to report the results in our return numbers and our audited financial statements every year, and that's a third way in which we're measuring it, right?
Yeah. So for the efficacy of the asset class, I would encourage you to think about it as a alternative to global equity, and one where you should expect to receive a premium over a long period of time. And 10 years is a reasonable time frame.
I think I can answer that pretty succinctly. My phone's blinking green. So I don't know. I'll talk. The long-term benchmark is a benchmark of your decision about whether to be in private equity or not. The shorter-term benchmark, because Margot is not given that choice of do you want to be in private equity or not. She is told we're in private equity and manage this portfolio. The short-term benchmark is a measure of the value they add. I would prefer to be able to measure that over a longer period than 3 years, but we have to find some balance point. So you have two benchmarks in this asset class, one for your decision level, one for the staff's. I would argue you even have the same thing in global equity. You have made a decision you want to be in global equity rather than fixed income because you expect an equity risk premium. Those are asset allocation decisions that you make, and so we want to measure those one way. And then you also have tools for the public because they want to measure us over short time periods, and the staff.
Okay. Let me take a question from Ms. Paquin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I had Paul, your original question, I had the same question about that too, so I appreciate the answers to that. So my question about this is, what type of investments would be in the core sub-asset class? And will this change to this benchmark give you more granular information to compare the performance of all the sub-asset classes within private equity?
Well, the second question first, that it will definitely give us better granular information, and that's the primary reason we're doing it. We're recommending a beginning allocation of 2% of the private equity portfolio into the core. And right now, because it is a new asset class, there is not a benchmark, but in the future there could be a benchmark. So we think it's wise to set it up this way so that if and when there is enough data, we will be ready to instigate a better benchmark.
So,
So these will be partnerships, just like we do now with various managers. They will buy companies that are perhaps a little more stable than the typical buyout fund and that have good cash flow characteristics. And so the concept there is that more of a yield concept, that these companies might, give us a 13% yield over a long period of time. So we might hold these for 10 years instead of 5 years.
It's more of a buy and hold strategy.
okay, all right.
I think part of the idea too in core, and it's still evolving, it's a new strategy, but I think that part of the idea for a group like CalSTRS is that it provides an opportunity for you to take advantage of some of the aspects of your program, its size, put significant amounts of dollars into very solid things, being able to take advantage of long-term liquidity where other investors might be looking for a faster turnover of those investments. So that's kind of the idea for CORE, and still kind of working with staff to exactly identify what that is. But from a benchmarking perspective, taking it from the buyouts area seems to make sense until there's more consistency around what the core private equity would actually be.
We just want to, the characteristics, another characteristic is because it is a new asset class, the managers are willing to give very significant concessions and large co-invests. So our fee load and carry load would be significantly reduced.
Okay,
So-
thank you. And how many years or months do you think it will take to have enough of a volume so you can look at a
Well,
benchmark?
it'll take years before we have meaningful results, but we have deals under due diligence now that we'd like to close in the near future to get into some of these partnerships. There's probably 20, it's a limited number of large investors that sovereign wealth funds, Canadian funds and such that are in these products now. And we think it is the smart money and the smart thing to do, and we'd like to be part of it.
Thank you.
Seeing there's no one else in the queue, there is a recommendation on INV 116. There is an accompanying letter by our private equity advisors, Makita, that's in support of this recommendation. At least one committee member has expressed some concerns and reservations about supporting it at this point. I don't know if there's others that have that same view. I would like to see if there's anyone else needs clarifying questions or comments. Okay.
Are you looking for a motion?
Oh, sure, if you'd like to, and then we could, would you like to move the recommendation?
I move the recommendation.
Okay, Mr. Huntsman's moved the staff recommendation. Is there a second? It's been moved and properly second to move the staff recommendation. Discussion on the staff recommendation. Paul, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump you and go to Ms. Higa because she hasn't spoken yet, okay?
I actually just have a question. I think, am I?
Told you, it's getting late.
Lost you.
Just
Can you
push your
punch
button
my
one more
name down?
time, please, Joy, thanks. There you go.
So I think just going back to some of the comments and questions that Paul raised, is there are we considering making a modification to the language in the policy to address the issue you raised? I mean, I thought that Chris indicated that there was agreement between the two of you, but I guess I wasn't clear.
On
if
my
we-
first point,
on your
which
first
is,
point.
which I'm now comfortable with.
Okay.
It's the second issue that I raised that I don't have a level of comfort yet, that I would want to see some more work done on the difference between the short and the long-term measurement, and understanding how they fit together. I think our primary responsibility as board members is the asset allocation and making those decisions. And I think there's been a lot more focus in this policy towards a benchmark to measure compensation decisions or to decide compensation decisions. And I don't think we've given enough thought to the other part of it and how to put them together. So just as one member of the committee, that would be, my interest would be to see that worked on a little bit more. I'm one of 12 now,
Exactly. So, back to you, Ms. Higa.
So my question went to Paul, the first part, I think, of the first question that Paul had, wondering if there was a language change we needed to make, but it sounds like there's not on that particular issue.
Okay, thank you. No one else in the queue? I do see activity. Ms. Ortega?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there a reason why we can't ask for further reporting on this issue? I mean, we can either move forward or not move forward today. I'm not clear on what the urgency, if there is an urgency to move forward
Good
today, but
question.
if there is,
I-
could we still just ask that there be further consideration of the issues that Paul has raised?
Would you?
I can jump in, Margot. The reason we're asking to come to you in June is so that we could make it effective for June 30 and use it in all your reporting at year end. We think it's a better benchmark for you to measure yourself. I'm concerned about what we're saying about the fund out to the public. The private equity policy actually is coming back to you again in July for more housekeeping changes, and I think that's where we could pick up the addition of not changing the benchmark, but pick up the addition to Paul of a better explanation on why the long-term benchmark is there and what we use it for. And so we can do that. We have to add some discretion and other things that we'll bring back in July. But I think our concern about the benchmark was getting it right for your measuring periods coming up.
I think with that commitment, that would make sense then to move forward.
To move forward, Mr. Taylor, okay. Well,
I might vote for it. I have one other question.
It's you and your questions that are keeping you from the Golden State Warriors. Just know, just know,
have to watch.
just know it's you.
Lamont, let the record show, Lamont.
But this would also change, going back for a 3-year period of time, the basis on which we calculate compensation decisions? Is that
The
correct?
compensation's a whole nother discussion at the compensation
Oh, I
committee.
thought
You
that-
don't do that here. This is only for the investment committee and their reporting. This is performance reporting. You're measuring stick for your performance reports. Just like we did earlier today, compensation has its own attachments and its
Okay.
own voting.
yes, absolutely.
That, can I just understand then, because that was certainly not the way I read. Staff further recommends, okay, so the benchmark customization be applied to all short-term horizons since the adoption of the GXPEI benchmark. So that's just saying that our short-term benchmark for performance measurements would be adjusted going back 3 years, but that would not have any impact on compensation benchmarks because those have to go through compensation committee?
Yeah, you don't, this committee doesn't have
Okay,
authority
that-
over the compensation.
That's-
It's all those
thank you.
appendixes.
Just wanted to understand that.
Okay,
Great, thank you.
last,
So it's a great question. The answer to that is yes.
Thank you, thank you.
thank you, Mr. Bartow. Last person to speak on this item, and we'll vote on it, Ms. Yamamoto?
Just a quick one, is the glossary part of this whole report? It's an attachment, so it's part of the policy? Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Yamamoto. Okay, there's been a motion on the floor, second, to adopt the staff recommendation as it appears on INV 116. Seeing no other people in the queue to speak, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Okay, the item passes. Thank you. Just for a point of information, we are going to, unless there's a compelling reason not to do this, so if there's a compelling reason not to do this, I'll listen to it. Otherwise, we're going to take information items 17 and 18 and move those to the July meeting, 17 and 18. But we'll take the action item now, Mike. The RFP, the real estate consultant RFP. And if you could, we've all read the report. We know an RFP is going out. If you could just speak about the timeline, because essentially what you're asking us to do is adopt this timeline to go out for an RFP for the real estate consultant contract.
Yes, for the record, Mike DeRay, Director of Real Estate, and to my right is Mike Thompson, Portfolio Manager in Real Estate.
Right, and so the timeline is on INV 152, and the key to the timeline is that we would start the RFP as soon as possible, and then we would conduct interviews in the fall. So I think that's the key that you're asking about.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thompson. One issue I would like to raise and to reflect as staff is going through this and the RFP is going out, we as a committee have said that we would like to explore alternative fee arrangements with our consultants that report directly to the investment committee. So I would ask that you think about that.
and navigate how that's communicated and be receptive to alternative models. And it's not specifically, it's just the first one we're dealing with, but if, I believe that reflects our collective opinion that we wanted to look at some alternative ways of compensating our consultants directly, and that should probably be in the RFP without us getting into the weeds. Chris?
My suggestion, the RFP process really likes a clear fee schedule because we have to rate people based on their fees. We could ask for the standard annual retainer fee, and then we could also ask for people to be creative and put the pressure on them and say, and the board would like to know what alternatives you might consider or propose. The RFP committee would have to score it based on the retainer fee, so just keep in mind of that. They can give some consideration maybe to the creativity, but at least it would expose you to what the consultants could come back with.
Sure, that's great. I mean, it's something we've been talking about for a couple of years as so this is trying to put some of those ideas into action and see if we.
Tom?
Just a suggestion, and we can deal with this in July. Perhaps we could collectively delegate to a group of 2, 3, or 4 interviewing the finalists and let that group make a recommendation to this board. Just because I know we all love 4 hours of interviewing for.
It's your consultant, it's up to you. We haven't done that. We've created a subcommittee that screened from the quarters or the semifinals to the finalists. Historically, your board, the entire committee has interviewed the finalists. Sure. It is your consultant.
Okay, so let's try not to figure that out
Yeah.
right now, but it's out.
It would be July, though, you're coming back in.
Right.
Yeah,
November.
so we've got some time to.
Yeah, I just thought July, we could talk about it.
Great.
Okay.
I was just going to say we have flexibility, just what Tom said. We could talk about it in July, but we don't have to pick the finalists. The interviews wouldn't have to happen until November.
That's great. And I think we've done that once before. We did do that, if I recall correctly, where a subcommittee of the investment committee dealt with an advisor, and we made the recommendation. We've done it in the past. So, yeah, we'll do that. Good, that's it. Thank you. Anything else you wanted to address? So we need a motion to approve the recommendation for the timeline for the RFP.
So moved.
It's been moved and properly seconded, Unterman and Vargas. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, it passes. So the information items 17 and 18 will push out till the first readings until July. Does that fundamentally change anything? No, the changes are not. Okay, so let's move those to July. Okay?
Your mic's on, it's fine.
Sorry, we're trying to, yeah. Okay, thanks, guys. The item 19, any information requests that you want to bring to our
The only
attention?
thing that I marked down was the request for transaction costs of the global equity portfolio.
Okay.
As it transitioned to increased exposure to non-U.S.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lamont. Item 20 is the draft agenda. It's pretty straightforward. We have a pretty stellar speaker that we have lined up to come in July. We will talk to staff about, we may or may not have that in here. We maybe hold it upstairs. We'll talk about where would be the most appropriate place and for, if we want to have more intimate conversation with Mr. Gray. Don't know. We can think that through. The investment belief number 8, the alignment, we want to get that up for a discussion at least for July. So I know PCA's got some work to do, working, surveying, and speaking with the committee members. Anything else there, Chris, that you want to highlight?
And just the first quarter score, I wanted to.
17-13.
I'd say that.
17-13 for those who are watching.
No, you hit it right on the head. We're going to add the discussion on the investment beliefs. I'm going to work hard to move some of these items actually up to consent.
Yeah.
Because as Jack said, we're already kind of long on time in July, so we will be tightening this schedule up a tad and adding a few things and dropping a few things.
Okay, good. Paul, did you want to weigh in?
I just that investment belief number 8.
Yep.
I'd rather have us define it as an investment belief relative to an alignment of financial interests, because investment belief number 8 has gone through lots of iterations that included a lot of other things. If somebody also wants us to discuss an investment belief relative to an alignment of political agreement, then that's, then that's potentially can be added too. But what I think this committee has been wanting is a discussion and consideration of an investment belief related to the alignment of financial interests.
So we'll make sure that PCA is aware that that's the focus of that. And so with that, we do have members of the public who have waited patiently, and I've sat on the other side of public meetings like this where I've been sitting all day saying not such nice things about people conducting business while we wait to speak. But now I know what it's like to be here. So it's late, but your comments are important to us, so we want to hear what you have to say. Our Alyssa from Unite Here. And do you have specific, okay, so Alyssa Giacchino from Unite Here, then Juan Chavez, Freddie, how do you pronounce your last name? Macaulay. Freddie Macaulay, thank you, and Danielle Lynch.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you. That
thank
is
you.
the order that we have requested, Mr.
Terrific.
Chair. Thank you, committee, for your attention at the end of a long day and into the Warriors game. We appreciate your time. So my name is Alyssa Giacchino. I'm with Unite Here. In a moment, you will hear from my colleagues here. We are here to speak about the Pullman Hotel in San Francisco Bay. It is a property owned in part by CalSTRS through CBRE, Strategic Partners U.S. Value Fund 7. Employees of the Pullman Hotel recently asked CBRE to direct its management company to implement an organizing agreement that would let these workers choose whether to join a union. We believe this should be a simple decision for CBRE. I think the staff and committee are well aware Unite Here has entered into such agreements with other managers in real estate and private equity and with their respective hotel operating companies. In the absence of such an agreement, the hotel could be open to the risk of a public labor dispute. We urge you to encourage CBRE to give the go-ahead to its operator to implement an organizing agreement for the employees of the Pullman Hotel. Thank you. I'll let you hear from them.
Greeting, board members. My name is Juan Chavez. I work in shipping and receiving in Pullman, in San Francisco Bay Hotel. You partly owned by CBRE, Partner 7 Fund. 4 weeks ago, me and my coworkers asked CBRE to tell managers to implement an organized agreement to allow us to decide whether we want a union without fear of being retaliated against. Since then, we phoned them, we've emailed them, we visited their CBRE offices in LA and San Francisco, and yet no response. This is not right. I work at the Pullman Hotel for 3 years, starting off as a dishwasher, working my way up to shipping and receiving. Like many of my coworkers, I love my job. We work hard, and I just want a chance to choose a union without feeling I'll get punished for doing so. Over the years, the people at Pullman have become my family. My routine every morning is to say hi to everyone in every department and make sure everybody's okay. It's getting harder to do that every day. I just want a chance to unionize without feeling punished in doing so. Like anywhere else, when you have a good structure, good support system, it can be a great place to work. When you don't have these things, it just becomes another 8-hour shift. We work in hospitality, which is, we want to be happy, we want our guests to come back, but we're not, at the rate we're going, we're just pushing our guests away. I know you all have a busy agenda today. A couple of my coworkers would also like to say words about this, but I want to point out, people who took the day off to appear here, but have decided not to speak today. My mama is over here. my housekeeping team. So please, CBRE, your investment managers, they're supposed to make sure the hotel will soon run well so they can get the best value for your funds. Tell them to give us a green light for the organizing agreement at the Pullman Hotel. Thank you guys so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Freddie McCauley, and this is Ching Shea. We're retirees of Local 2. I was with Hilton, and Ching was with Park 55. He was with Park 55 for 30 years. He was in room service. I worked at Hilton for 10 years. I live in Hayward, and I was a communications operator at Hilton Union Square Hotel for 10 years. Thanks to my union, I was able to retire in 2013 with a good pension. Now I spend my time by taking business classes through Fred Pryor, and I work on call doing convention staffing. I want to tell you about one of the most important moments during my time at Hilton. In 2004, our hotel locked us out of our jobs for nearly 2 months. One of the reasons they did that was because we were insisting that in the future, when Hilton employees in other hotels want to organize a union, they could do that under the protection of an organizing agreement, a card check neutrality agreement. It took a long struggle, 2 months that we were locked out and not paid. This put a financial burden on the workers. And it took another 2 years during which we asked customers to boycott our hotel. But eventually, we won. Today, whenever Hilton manages a new hotel in San Mateo or in San Francisco, employees have the right to organize into a union without fear of retaliation. In fact, a hotel close by the Pullman Hotel, the DoubleTree, San Jose, organized through one of these agreements. Hilton employees have that right. Employees of most major hotel companies have that right. In fact, the company that manages the Pullman has given employees that same protection in other cities. But in our industry, the decision is up to the owner. The owner decides whether workers have the protection of an ongoing organizing agreement, or if it has to be a big dispute when workers want to organize for a union. That's why we're here today asking you, as pod owners of the Pullman Hotel, tell CBRE to direct management to implement an organizing agreement. That's right and that's fair. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm my last speaker here. My name is Daniel Lynch. I'm a public high school educator of world history and government economics to English learners at Galileo Academy of Technology and Sciences in San Francisco. As you would know, I'm a CalSTRS member and want to thank you briefly for managing my future. With that said, I want to add my voice of support to the request you've heard from the workers of Pullman Hotel. This is an important issue for teachers. It's no secret that teachers are under incredible pressure due to the soaring cost of living in the Bay Area. Many of us can't afford to live in communities we serve. But more than that, the economic crisis is making it harder and harder to do the work we joined this profession to do. As you may know, in a school district right next door to this luxury hotel, this is Palo Alto Unified School District, Stanford, same area, same neighborhood, 1 in every 3 children is considered homeless. Most of the rest struggle in this district to pay basic bills or see the doctor. When families are under such financial pressures, when their housing, their health care, and their retirements are insecure, it makes it all the harder to provide the kind of supportive environment children need to thrive. As teachers, we do everything we can to provide opportunities to the next generation, but we can only do so much. One of the most important ways working families can turn this situation around is by organizing into unions. But nobody should have to make that choice in an environment where companies take advantage of people's income insecurity, pressure them, or create a climate of fear. And teachers' retirement savings certainly shouldn't be invested in places that don't guarantee real freedom of choice. Please insist that our investment managers commit to an organizing agreement so workers at the Pullman Hotel can make these important decisions for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so those are the speakers. So I would like to, these are people who sat for 6 hours, who came a long way to be here, made great sacrifice to be here today, maybe took time off from work. And, I'm mindful of the fact that we are limited partners and we only have so much that we can do under the law and what's appropriate. But if what we've heard today from these workers and their allies are true, I think we have a moral obligation to communicate. And I preface this, if what they say is to be factual, there's always two sides of the story. I don't doubt what they say are saying is true. I think we have a moral obligation to, at the very least, to engage at the appropriate level, if it's a letter, working with counsel and making sure it's sent appropriately, that this matter has been brought to our attention, and that you'll get the right tone and the right message, that we're disappointed to hear that workers are working in a hostile environment and or being intimidated or threatened. I know there are two sides of the story because I've been part of stories, and there's always two sides. And usually the truth lies somewhere in between. And but at the very least, we expect, it's good business. We heard from Mr. Blake today, exemplified what we want in corporate America and in leadership, human capital, the value. And far too frequently, the types of testimonies we've heard today is just too frequent. So I don't want to go on my soapbox. I would like to direct the staff to, at the very least, write a letter, get some additional information, and express our disappointment that these workers are working in such a hostile environment, and that we expect better from our partners.
You've that's absolutely consistent with what you've done in the past, which is direct staff to engage the management. We have already started that and would increase from here. We've had discussions with them and take this input, share that with them, and follow through and report back to you.
Very good. We appreciate that. Okay, so with that, are there any? Oh, Ms. Baker, you're going to keep us from the. It's you.
It's only 27 with 2
If I were
minutes left.
taller, it might have been easier to see me. Jennifer Baker with the California Teachers Association. We just wanted to echo the comments that were made by Unite Here members. We stand in full solidarity in the fight and struggles that they're trying to achieve, and we encourage you to have the conversations, Harry, that you were noting earlier, to make sure that the investments that you're making are aligned with the values. Just as you've had the conversations about investment beliefs, it's one thing to have the beliefs, it's another thing to have your ESG values and your risk factors. The question is, what kind of conversations do you have within the investment community to ensure that the values and beliefs are implemented at every level? And we believe that this is one of those times where you have an exercise that you can make as far as your values. And so we encourage you to have the appropriate discussions that you need to have, and we believe in the work that you and your staff will do regarding this issue.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no one. Oh, go ahead.
And I'm not going to say anything that others haven't already said, so I'm completely in favor of what you said, Harry.
Okay.
The right thing to say, the right thing to say.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. Long day, we accomplished a lot. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. Thanks, staff and everyone who put the agendas together. Full participation today. Good job, everyone. We're adjourned. We'll see you tomorrow.